The last hope of Zylm. Dr. Julian Maher crouched near the perimeter fence of the research outpost, his gloved fingers brushing over soil that once pulsed with life. 4 months ago, satellite photos had shown faint traces of bioluminescent vegetation clinging to the higher ridge lines. Now it was all the same dull gray. His sampler clicked once, recording atmospheric drift, and he logged the numbers without looking. The planet Zylm was dying, not explosively, but quietly. With every passing day, it simply lessened. The outpost behind him blinked quietly against the gloom, powered by solar collectors that drank what little light Zylm's twin sun still gave. No permanent human presence had ever taken root here, only research detachments, rotating scientists tasked with monitoring collapse. They were forbidden to interfere. Observe, record, report. Julian had followed that rule for 4 long months. Then the sensors chimed once, soft but unmistakable. Motion just beyond the fence. He looked up. At first, he thought it was heat distortion. Zylm's atmosphere could play tricks, bending light like water. But this shape didn't waver. It moved steady, upright. Someone, no, something, was approaching the compound on foot. He stood slowly, lowering the sampler. His breath caught. A woman, tall, thin, wrapped in torn ceremonial cloth, once white, now dimmed by dust and time. Her skin was a striking violet gray, smooth like polished stone. Long ink-black hair fell loose over her shoulders. Cradled in her arms was something bundled in red cloth, limp against her chest. She passed the outer line of sensors. They chirped, then stilled. No weapons, no threat. Just silence. He stepped outside, the outpost door hissing closed behind him. She didn't stop walking, her bare feet moving carefully over the cracked ground like each step was a promise not to fall apart. When she finally stood before him, she didn't speak right away, just looked at him with enormous glassy eyes, violet with flecks of gold, as if stars had drowned in them. Then, in a voice weathered as though scraped across stone. "My milk has dried up, human. My baby hasn't eaten for days." Julian's pulse stuttered. Not the words exactly, but the way she said them. No drama, no pleading. Just fact. He looked at the bundle in her arms. A child. Tiny, violet-skinned like her. Limbs limp, mouth dry and cracked. Its chest rose barely, too slow, too shallow. He hadn't held a child since Earth. Since Olivia. Since the hospital hallway where he'd stood frozen, helpless, while machines screamed and a nurse told him he was 5 minutes too late. And now this. "Come inside," he said, stepping back. She followed slowly, carefully. He noted the way she walked, protecting the child from even the softest breeze. She was starving, anyone could see that, but she moved like glass on the edge of shattering. Against protocol. Inside the outpost, lights adjusted and climate seals closed behind them with a hiss. She blinked against the shift in light and warmth. Her gaze swept the room, metal benches, analysis screens, racks of tagged soil samples. No comforts, just functionality. Julian opened a crate and pulled out a thermal blanket, then a sealed water pouch. He offered them both without speaking. She took the water but didn't drink. Instead, she tilted the infant's head gently and squeezed out a few drops. The child's throat fluttered once, then stilled. "How long?" he asked quietly. She didn't look at him, just murmured something low in her own tongue, a sound like wind over broken glass. Then in words shaped carefully, for rotations. He nursed nothing. "I walked. I followed the metal lines until I saw your light." He swallowed. The nearest village was hundreds of kilometers from here, and most had collapsed into dust long before his arrival. She must have walked without stopping, without eating, in this cold. "What's his name?" he asked. "Carr," she said, pressing her lips to the child's temple. Julian dropped to one knee and unzipped the medical case. He couldn't save a child on Earth, but here, maybe here he could do something. He took a scanner and swept it over Carr's body. Low thermal signature, dehydrated, no infection, but dangerously malnourished. "We can try something," he murmured. "It won't be much, but—" She didn't interrupt. She just stared at him, and for the first time, he saw the tremble in her arms, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. He moved to prepare a low-pressure feeding line. Nothing invasive, just enough to let the child receive fluid without choking. Her eyes followed every motion. "You're not afraid," he said without meaning to. "I have no room left for fear," she replied. Her voice was softer now, her face unreadable. "What's your name?" he asked. "Amria." He nodded, though her name hung in the air like a question he hadn't earned the right to ask. He retrieved a ration bar, broke off fragments, and mixed them into water. It wasn't milk, but it held nutrients, basic proteins, simple sugars. Enough to buy time if the child's body didn't reject it. "May I?" he asked, motioning toward Carr. She hesitated, then handed him over. Julian hadn't touched a child in years. His hands shook a little as he adjusted the tubing, measured the intake, dribbled the first drop past Carr's lips. The child didn't stir. He waited. Second drop. Third. A faint twitch at the throat. A swallow. Amria gasped, not loud, but sharp, like breath she hadn't allowed herself to take until now. Carr's chest lifted, fell, lifted again. Julian looked up and froze. Amria was crying. Not the kind of tears that moved, these slid silently, slowly down violet cheeks, disappearing into the dust on her skin. She didn't wipe them. She just sat unmoving, eyes fixed on her child. "I thought he would die in my arms," she whispered. "And I had made peace with that. But now," she didn't finish. Julian knelt beside her and placed the child back in her arms. She clutched him, wrapping him in the blanket, cradling his face like it was made of light. They didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, she leaned sideways, her head brushing against the wall, her eyes closed, not sleep, just release. Julian sat cross-legged across from them, the weight in his chest shifted, then settled. He knew the consequences. He had broken protocol. This could cost him everything. But that didn't matter now. A woman had walked across a dying planet to save her child, and a man who had once promised never to fail again had opened his door. Outside, the dust drifted, slow, silent, heavy. But inside, something resisted the pull of gravity. Something lived. Through the night. The night deepened, not in darkness, Zylm never truly darkened, but in weight, in stillness, in the density of air that pressed down like stone. The wind had long since fallen silent. Dust lingered in the atmosphere like breath never released. Dr. Julian Maher sat at the edge of the low cot, motionless. Across the small room, Amria slept, if it could be called that. Her limbs were curled around the infant, a protective arc of bone and skin, one arm draped across Carr's body, the other beneath her head. Her face was turned toward the child's, their foreheads touched. Neither stirred. Julian watched the rise and fall of Carr's narrow chest, counting seconds between each breath. Shallow, irregular, but breathing. Still breathing. He hadn't moved for over an hour. His back ached, his legs were numb from sitting so long without shifting, but he was afraid that if he did, if he so much as inhaled too deeply, the moment would fracture. A child's fragile existence was balanced on the knife edge between recovery and loss. And he'd lived on that edge before. Once. Long ago. He closed his eyes, only for a heartbeat. Not here. Not now. He stood carefully, easing each footstep as if the floor might betray him. The lab bench was cold to the touch, harsh steel against the damp warmth of his palm. He opened a diagnostics tray, slid out the nutrient cartridges, and laid out what he had left, powdered protein stabilizers, glucose capsules, filtration strips, supplies meant to keep a fully grown man alive for 10 days, now to be repurposed for something infinitely more delicate. The ration paste alone would be lethal to a child car's size, too dense, too fast digesting. He needed to synthesize something simpler, something that wouldn't overwhelm what little function the infant's digestive system still had. He set to work. The old reflexes returned as if summoned by muscle memory. Not elegant. Improvised. He was a biologist, not a pediatrician, but science, real science, was not sterile and perfect. It was what you did when things fell apart, when people bled in your arms and there was no one left to call. He crushed a nutrient bar between layers of medical gauze, filtering it through microfiltration mesh. The resulting powder was fine as ash. He diluted it in distilled water, added trace elements, electrolytes, sugars, then ran it through the centrifugal processor to remove particulates. What emerged was a transparent, faintly gold solution, light refracting off it like broken glass. It wasn't milk, not even close, but it might work. He poured the liquid into a sterile dropper. It was warm from the device's thermal setting, barely above body temperature, enough to not shock the child's system. Behind him, Amria shifted. Her breath caught, sharp and quiet. Julian turned. She was awake, though her eyes hadn't opened. Her body remained curved around the child, but there was tension now, barely visible but unmistakable. Not fear, readiness. Like a wild animal stirring under frost. He waited. Slowly, her eyes opened. Luminous. Quiet. Sharp as cut crystal. She looked at him, not at the dropper. "I didn't mean to sleep," she said softly. Julian didn't answer. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, careful not to make a sound. He held up the dropper. "It's ready." She shifted upright, movement slow and protective. The child remained cradled in her lap. She said nothing, only offered the faintest nod of permission. Julian leaned forward and touched Carr's lips with the dropper. The first drop rolled across the infant's tongue. Nothing. Second drop. A twitch, barely perceptible. Third. Carr's throat convulsed. A weak swallow. Julian froze. Waited. Another swallow. A breath, deeper this time. He looked at the monitor. A small spike. Heart rate up by 2 points. Oxygen saturation rising by decimal margins. Subtle, but real. She was responding. The decision. By morning, or what passed for morning on Zylm, a slight shift in the twin sun's positioning, Carr had taken nearly 30 milliliters of the solution. Not enough, not nearly enough, but his eyes had opened once, briefly, revealing irises the color of twilight shadows. Amria hadn't left his side. She'd barely moved, except to adjust her hold when Julian offered more of the liquid. Her own lips were cracked from dehydration, her skin dulling from its vibrant violet to something ashen. Julian brought her water, proper nutrient paste. At first, she refused, but when he explained that she needed strength to hold her child, she acquiesced. Small sips. Careful bites. Every movement measured. "Your outpost," she said finally, her voice low. "Others will come." Julian glanced at the comms panel. The daily check-in light was blinking yellow. Missed transmission. Standard protocol was clear, one missed check-in triggered an automated alert. A second would dispatch a retrieval team. 24 hours. "Yes," he said. "Soon." Her eyes, too perceptive, too wise for comfort, held his. "And what happens to us when they arrive?" Julian looked away. He knew the mission parameters. Non-interference. Observation only. Contact with indigenous populations was strictly prohibited, especially in terminal biospheres like Zylm. The scientific reasoning was sound, intervention altered natural outcomes, created dependencies, distorted data. What he'd already done would cost him his position. What he was contemplating now was worse. "They'll take you back," he said, not meeting her eyes. "To your village." A lie. They would document the contact breach. They would terminate his assignment. And they would escort Omria and Carr back to wherever they'd come from, with supplies perhaps, but nothing more. Because intervention wasn't authorized. Because Zylm was already classified as terminal. Because hard choices had been made about resource allocation years before Julian had ever set foot here. "There is no village," Omria said quietly. "Not anymore." Julian looked up. Her face was composed, calm, but there was something behind her eyes, not grief, something sharper. Knowledge. The dust took them. First the young ones, then the elders. The plants went silent. The water turned gray. One by one, we fell into sleep. She touched Carr's forehead. A handful of us walked toward the mountains. We had heard there might be green things there still. But the journey was long. Too long. Julian swallowed. "And the others?" "Gone," she said simply. "Only Carr and I remain." The weight of it settled between them. An entire species. An entire world. Down to 2. The comms panel blinked again. 16 hours until the second missed check-in. Julian stood and crossed to his workstation. He pulled up the data, soil samples, atmospheric readings, extinction projections. The numbers hadn't changed. By every metric, Zylm was beyond saving. Its decline had started centuries ago, accelerated by a cascade of ecological failures. What he was seeing now was just the final exhalation. But behind him, a child breathed. Against all odds, against the weight of scientific certainty, a child lived. He made his decision. Julian accessed the security protocols, entered his clearance codes, and began the override sequence for the outpost's emergency transport. It was meant for medical evacuations, staff retrieval in case of catastrophic event. Small, fast, and most importantly, equipped with extended life support systems. There was one chance. One protocol that might work. Emergency refugeeism under the Planetary Extinction Act. It was a legal gray area, meant for civilizations with strategic or scientific value. But it had been invoked exactly once before. As he worked, he felt Omria's eyes on him. He didn't explain, and she didn't ask. The understanding between them transcended words. When he finished, he returned to her side. "There's a place," he said softly. "A station in orbit around a planet called Nexus. Research facility. Medical expertise beyond anything we have here." "And they will help us?" she asked, no hope in her voice, just the same steady calm. "I don't know," Julian admitted. "But we can try." Omria looked down at Carr, who stirred in his sleep, tiny fingers curling against the blanket. Then she met Julian's gaze. "When do we leave?" "Now," he said. "We leave now. New beginnings." The emergency transport cut through space, its engines running hot against the darkness. Inside, Julian monitored the life support systems. Everything nominal. Everything holding. Omria sat in the co-pilot's seat, Carr bundled against her chest. The infant was stronger now, not well, not yet, but fighting. His breathing had stabilized, and twice he had managed to swallow a full feeding without pausing. They had left Zylm 12 hours ago. Julian had transmitted a coded message to the Nexus station just before departure. No response yet, but they were still too far out. The silence didn't surprise him. What followed, that would determine everything. "Tell me about this place," Omria said, breaking the long quiet between them. "This Nexus." Julian adjusted the trajectory slightly before answering. "It's a research station. Medical primarily, but with botanical and xenobiological divisions. They study endangered life forms, attempt preservation, sometimes relocation. And the people there, they are like you? A complicated question. Julian considered it. Some are scientists, yes. Others are doctors, engineers. Some are from Earth, like me. Others come from different worlds. Amria nodded, seemingly satisfied. She turned her gaze to the viewport, where Zylm was now just a fading speck, indistinguishable from the other stars. Her home. Her world. Disappearing. We had stories, she said softly, about the dust. That it was punishment for ancient wrongs. That we had taken too much from the soil, built cities where forests should stand. That we had forgotten the names of the first waters. She touched Carr's cheek. But I think it was simpler than that. All things end. Some slowly. Some before their time. Julian didn't respond. What could he say? That she was right. That worlds died every day in this vast universe, some with witnesses, many without. That his presence on Zylm had never been about saving it, only about documenting its final moments. Instead, he checked the scanners again. 8 more hours to Nexus. 8 hours to convince them. The communications array chirped suddenly. Incoming transmission. Julian straightened, surprised. They were still far outside standard range. He accepted the connection. A woman's face appeared on the screen. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of xenomedicine at Nexus. Her expression was serious, her dark eyes evaluating. Dr. Maher, she said, no greeting, no preamble. You've violated at least 6 protocols I'm aware of. Possibly more. Julian nodded. Yes. The board is convening to discuss your actions. They're considering charges. I understand. Elena leaned closer to the screen. What you don't understand is that I've reviewed your initial scans. The child you're carrying, it's the last of its kind, Julian. The very last. Julian glanced at Amria, who was watching the exchange with perfect stillness. Yes, he said. And the mother? Also the last. Elena was silent for a long moment. Then, the Preservation Statute of 2189 supersedes non-interference directives in cases of imminent extinction. It grants emergency sanctuary status. She looked down, consulting something off-screen. I've already initiated the protocols. Medical teams are standing by. We'll monitor your approach. Julian felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't realized was there. Thank you. Elena's expression softened slightly. You're still in trouble, Julian. But you did the right thing. The connection ended. He turned to Amria, who hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. We're going to be welcomed, he explained. There will be doctors for Carr. Food. Shelter. She nodded once, her golden-flecked eyes steady on his. And for how long? Julian understood the question. Not about temporary accommodations, about the future. About survival in a universe where they were now truly alone. I don't know, he admitted. But you won't be alone. 6 hours later, the Nexus station appeared in their viewport, a gleaming structure of interconnected modules circling a small, verdant moon. As they approached, Julian saw the docking bay opening, medical personnel visible through the transparent barriers, waiting. They'll help Carr first, he explained as they prepared for docking procedures. Then they'll want to learn from you, about your people, your world. Amria touched his hand lightly. And you? Julian hesitated. I'll face consequences. But I'll stay as long as I can. The ship docked with a gentle thud. Beyond the airlock, Julian could see Elena Vasquez and her team waiting. Medical equipment ready. Faces concerned but determined. He stood, offering his hand to Amria. She took it, rising gracefully despite her exhaustion, car secure in her other arm. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at him, then down at her son, whose eyes were now open, clear, watching. When she looked up again, there was something new in her expression. Not quite hope, she was too wise for that simple emotion, but perhaps its more resilient cousin. Determination. "Yes," she said. "We are ready." The airlock cycled open. Together, they stepped forward, the last survivors of a dying world and the man who had broken every rule to save them. Behind them, Zylm continued its slow fade into dust and memory. But ahead, impossibly, lay a future, tenuous, uncertain, but real. A child would grow. A mother would heal. A civilization would be remembered. And sometimes, Julian thought as they walked toward the waiting doctors, that was enough. The end.